completed one, we're going to put it in our
The weight loss if need to be.
But really throughout the rehearsals, you get a closer look.
Hello and welcome to The Focus Show. I'm your host, Aaliyah Alexander, and today I'm joined with Samuel Scott Sr. So, Mr. Scott, what was it like being a NASA engineer?
Being a NASA engineer, first of all, requires working with a lot of different types of science and engineering people. Most people think of NASA as just space, but it's everything from the weather to structures, to materials, to acoustics, noise reduction, active controls, aircraft, spacecraft, and even some of the work we do applies to submarines. Okay, so it's a varied experience, and normally each individual works on specific projects. In working on a specific project, that means you work with others who have something to do or some interest or requirement inside that project. Okay, so it's very exciting to work with so many different people and different types of science and engineering backgrounds.
What made you want to be an engineer?
Well, as a young child and growing up, we always were interested in model aircraft, model cars, etc. So we would save up our little newspaper money or whatever job we could find, lawn mowing, and we would go down to the hobby store and buy aircraft or cars and put them together. The aircraft were normally made out of balsa wood with paper around them with a rubber band and a propeller. And I always enjoyed working with model aircraft, and that's part of what made me want to be an engineer, plus my junior high school and high school education, because we did a lot of, I took college, what we call college prep back then, and we did a lot of science and mathematics, etc.
All right. How did you end up working for NASA?
That's a pretty long story. When I first graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, 1960, well, let's go back a little bit further than that. Graduated from Schindler High School in Pittsburgh and went to the University of Pittsburgh with an idea of being a mechanical engineer. But they had a program with an aero or an aeronautical option, so I took that. 1958, we come up with the firing off or the launching of the Sputnik by the Russians, and that turned everything around in America into aerospace instead of just aeronautics. When the Russians fired that off, that stirred up a lot of controversy and a lot of concern in America. Now, we were working on, Americans, not me personally, but Americans were working on the Vanguard missile, which was supposed to be part of the Cold War peaceful use of rockets. We already had in store in Huntsville, Alabama, under Dr. Werner von Braun, who we got out of Nazi Germany in World War II, we already had the Redstone missile, but they chose to use the Vanguard. The Vanguard exploded on the launch pad several times, and we finally launched our first satellite with the Redstone missile, and but that came out of Huntsville, Alabama, with Dr. Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi German scientist that we brought here to America. So I spent the next 2 years at University of Pittsburgh and finished that up, and then I went to the Navy Department in Philadelphia, and I worked on a lot of secret projects back then. Blast overpressures from atomic explosions, the early launch of the Polaris submarine from depth inside of the submarine. Worked with a world-renowned scientist, Dr. F.O. Ringleb, R-I-N-G-L-E-B. And so at that point, STF, that's the Space Task Group, STG rather, STG Space Task Group at NASA moved from Langley down to Houston, Texas under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. So when they moved down there, they took half the people here at Langley in Hampton down to Houston to start that and fulfill their mission, and that left a lot of vacancies here at NASA Langley. So they sent out a call government-wide for any engineers that wanted to come to NASA Langley. Well, I immediately accepted it, even though I had a little bit of concern about going back to the South, which is where I came from, but I came anyway. And I landed in Hampton on March 26, 1962, and I started working for NASA Langley. One of the first 4 black engineers to work for NASA Langley. There were other black engineers, a couple of them there, but this was like within a 1-month period. So about 4 of us showed up within a period of from January 1st to about the end of March. Okay.
What type of work did you do with NASA?
My job at NASA when I got here was high temperature materials and structures. And what I did was work on the Gemini heat shield material. A spacecraft, any spacecraft that's launched out of space, into outer space and re-enters the Earth atmosphere has to have a heat shield on it because it comes so fast that the spacecraft would burn up, as you're well aware with the shuttle, 2 shuttles that we had that burned up, or 1 shuttle that we had that burned up. So we developed the materials that go on the face of the capsule, and I started working on the Gemini, which carried 2 astronauts. Then we were at the same time doing advanced research on the Apollo, which carried 3 astronauts. So I did that work. Then I turned into our early work. Was one of the first people to start working on a Mars entry vehicle and the heat shield for that. Now, what's the difference in re-entry and entry? Simple. If you shoot off a rocket, goes into space and orbits the Earth, or goes to the moon, whatever, and then comes back to Earth, that's re-entry. On entry, like the Martian vehicle that I worked on, or the Martian heat shield that I worked on, you shoot that to Mars, it ain't coming back. So it's entry, one-time entry, okay? But it's not coming back to Earth with that same heat shield. So I worked on both the re-entry and the entry materials and structures at that time.
What type of training did it take to be an engineer?
Well, it took all kinds of algebra, trigonometry, geometry, materials, college courses that everything from engineering drawing all the way up to physics. Now, an aeronautical engineer or an aerospace engineer pretty much has a minor automatically in physics, chemistry, mathematics, and engineering, because you have to be all of those things to be an aerospace engineer. You have to know all of those things, okay? So that's the kind of training. I started at University of Pittsburgh in 1956 and graduated in 1960. And many semesters I had 20 and a half credits in one semester. And, you know, a lot of the kids now complain about 12, okay? But it was kind of rough, but I made it.
That's good to hear.
I wasn't going to let anything hold me back. That was my goal, to do that. And when you set a goal, you achieve the goal.
Yeah,
okay?
that's true.
That's the way I am. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Did you earn any type of awards during your tenure with NASA?
Main thing we did was we did a group program, so it was a group award with technology students and engineering students from Old Dominion University and Norfolk State College at the time. It was not even Norfolk State University, so that was many years ago. Okay, and we brought those students in as apprentices, shall we say, for 2 summers. And when they finished the program, they had learned so much about engineering in so many different ways because we only kept them like 4 weeks on one technology, 4 weeks on another technology, 2 weeks on this technology, just to get them accustomed to all of the widespread things that NASA did and let them have a way of choosing what they wanted to work on. And then I did, they asked me to become small and minority business advisor to Langley in order to increase the participation of Black and Asian and women small business engineering firms to do contract work for NASA. So those are the 2 awards, shall we say, I got. Okay.
What type of people did you work with?
Oh, goodness. Every kind you can think of, every nationality, all right, every background. And remember now, what is the purpose of NASA? NASA does not produce rockets, it does not produce spacecraft, all of that stuff. We primarily do research papers, and we turn that information over to the aircraft companies and the spacecraft companies and the Weather Channel, et cetera. Whatever type of work we do all of that through research papers. I've written several research papers. Some are secret, and I can't talk to you about them. So that's the kind of work that you did. The people that you work for had all of those different science and engineering backgrounds, and you had to be able to work with them. We worked with a lot of Iranians, a lot of Indians, a lot of people from England, France, Belgium, Germany, all over the world who came to NASA, especially postdoctoral. Postdoctoral is a person who already has their doctorate degree in a particular field, and then they come to work for NASA on a HB1 visa or some type of visa, call it a green card.
Yeah.
And then they have to go back to their country, but most of them chose to stay here. Okay, so those are the kind of people that you had to work with. Had a lot of people who thought they were the cat's meow, and we had the regular folks, you know, so you had to deal with the cat's meow types. That means I think I'm important, okay? And they're really not, because everything at NASA is teamwork. Very few things are singular achievements, okay?
All right, so we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I have more questions for you, Mr. Scott.
Okay, great.
All right.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Whoever you are, whatever you do, whatever your dream is,
Hi, welcome back to The Focus Show. I'm your host, Aaliyah Alexander, and today I'm here with Samuel Scott Sr. And we already mentioned this before, but what was it like being one of the first African-American engineers to work for NASA?
It was kind of rough, shall we say, especially when you come to a place like Hampton, Virginia. I was born in Mobile, Alabama, raised in Tampa, Florida. Finally went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, and I got out of the segregated South into the more integrated North. And then it was kind of a decision that you had to make to go back to the segregated South. And that's where I came back to working for NASA Langley. I had some very excellent, I'm just going to call them white friends. I made them, or they made me, or we made friendships. But then we had a lot of people who had their own particular concerns about minority or black engineers. Now back then we were called Negroes. Then we became black. Then we became African American, okay? Back before that, when I was born, you were colored. So you can see the progression. But the South was not nearly as bad when I came back to it in 1962. I made many white friends because that's what the majority of the people at NASA were at that time. And working with them was just an excellent experience because I had had segregated experiences in the South. When I went to Pittsburgh, I had to go to school with so many different nationalities because Pittsburgh is a very international populace. So going to high school there and finishing up high school there, you had to go to school with a lot of people so I could learn to make friends. And then when I came to NASA, I learned to make friends, all right?
It seemed pretty
some were
rough.
good, some were good, some were bad. Let's put it that way.
Did you ever work with Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan?
Not on any particular research project because they were mathematicians at first. Mary finally became an engineer after gaining some. If you watch the movie Hidden Figures, she had to go through a lot to get her engineering degree, but she finally became the first woman engineer. I was one of the first 4 black men engineers that came to NASA. I did not work with them on any research projects. I did work with them with the National Technical Association, which is a nationwide group, actually it's an international group of black scientists and engineers. Mary was our secretary, Mary was one of our vice presidents. Katherine was our treasurer. Dorothy did not belong to it at that time. And Eunice Smith was the secretary. I was the local president at the time, okay? And we put on the first international black technical conference right here in Hampton, Virginia in 1977.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we had people from all over the world, Great Britain and France, Belgium, come on down to Tanzania, Nigeria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was an international technical conference where the scientists and the engineers came in and presented their work to a group of about, I'm going to say we had at least 400 people here in Hampton from all over the country. All right? But I never worked with them on science and engineering projects at NASA, but they were very good friends of mine. Matter of fact, Katherine still is living today. She's about 101 years old now. I'm 80, going on 81, so we're still here.
How valuable were those ladies to you and your work that needed to be completed?
Oh, goodness. Here's one thing that everybody needs to know. I don't care if you're 8 years old or 80 years old. There are other people in the world who know something that you don't know, who can do things that you can't do. So therefore, you always try to strike up a conversation, get off your cell phone and Facebook and Twitter and blah, blah, blah. Strike up a conversation with people of different backgrounds, different races, different everything, and you learn things. So these ladies were mentors to me. Mary Jackson was my neighbor. I could walk from my house today to her house, and she's passed on. So once you do that, you end up learning a lot, and it makes you much broader, you much smarter, because there's a whole, you might be smart in one thing, but there are 5 people that are smarter than you in that thing, plus smart in other things. So you have to learn how to learn. You learn to learn from other folks. And I learned from these ladies Their shoulders I stood on. Hopefully there were many other engineers and scientists after me that stood on my shoulders, okay? So it's a shoulder to shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. Always move it up. Don't move backwards. So yeah, these ladies were very valuable to me in assisting me in coping, shall I say. Now, coping for a male is totally different from coping as a female in that kind of segregated or previously segregated environment, but you learn, okay?
Do you keep in touch with individuals that you work with at NASA?
Oh yeah, matter of fact, I just did a Black History Month lecture, I won't call it a lecture, an appearance at First Baptist Church Ordinary up in Hayes, Virginia, because one of my good friends, James Harris, he's a pastor now, and he asked me to come up, so he introduced me to Miss Dr. Catherine Brown, who was a member of the church, and Dr. Ward Warren, who was the pastor of the church, and they asked me to come up and speak to the congregation on during Black History Month on a theme of "We shall all rise again," etc. We shall rise again, or something like that. But at any rate, it was very interesting. I enjoyed the soul food dinner myself, but it was great. Okay, so yeah, I do keep in touch with them all the time.
What other memories did you have working at NASA?
Well, some of them I really don't want to mention, but at any rate, I'll mention a few. I was assigned to, let me give you one that shows you what you had to contend with. I was assigned to a developing facility where we took a small what we call it a head of a wind tunnel, and it was one of the highest powered, 1 megawatt worth of energy that went into this thing. We used to have to call the Virginia Power and let them know we were getting ready to fire off because it would just drain everything, okay? All right, so we developed this thing, and we didn't make it, but we had to develop it with a company called Thermal Dynamics up in Lebanon, New Hampshire. And it was around the Christmas season, 1964, that they were going to do the test run, and we had to get it all completed by the end of the year. So I was supposed to go up to Thermal Dynamics, except my supervisor came in and told me, he said, "Sam, we're going to send Ronnie up." Well, Ronnie is a good old boy from Auburn University in Alabama, very good friend of mine. We made good friends. And he said, "Well, why are you sending me?" He says, "I don't work on that. Send Sam." They said, "Well, no. Well, we're going to send you because you got more experience." So he went up there. They blew the whole thing up. I mean, $98,000 in 1964 is a lot of money. Blew the whole head up, and then they had to make another one real quick so we could get it tested. Well, they couldn't test it up in Lebanon, New Hampshire. We had to go all the way to Los Angeles, California. Well, Ronnie says, "I'm going home to Alabama to see my family." So then they sent me out to Los Angeles, California to do the test at North American Aviation out there, because that's the only place they could test it. Well, so we succeeded, brought it back, and it was one of our excellent test facilities. It produced a very high temperature, like 4,000 degree air or gas coming out of it, so we could test the entry vehicles, okay? All right, so I finally asked my supervisor, "Well, why did you send Ronnie out there in the first place?" And he says, "Well, we just didn't think that they would like a black man to come up there to New Hampshire to do the test." Well, see, me doing the test meant I had control over them in a sense. And when I say control, I was supervising the test. Ronnie didn't know anything about the head, so he couldn't supervise it properly. Not that that's what caused it to blow up, but that doesn't matter, okay? So then now I got to go to LA. I can do it now because I'm going to Los Angeles, but I couldn't do it going to Lebanon, New Hampshire. So that's the kind of crazy stuff you got mixed up in. You know, everybody apologizes, but it's, you know, kind of too late. Okay, so that's one experience. The other experience was the group thing that we did with the technology students. The other thing I did was I lectured in 1964. I was chosen to lecture on what we had is a big tour of NASA Langley, and I lectured everybody from Dr. Werner von Braun out of Huntsville to the director of NASA in Washington, D.C., Dr. Bud Holland, president of Hampton Institute at the time, not university. People from all over the world would come. Then one of my favorite things that I did was we put on, in addition to the minority or black conference of scientists and engineers from all over the world, we did a NATO conference on structures and materials, okay, that were made from carbon fiber, much lighter, much stronger. That's what we make the F-35, the B-2 bomber, the YF-17 for stealth aircraft. We put on a international thing for NATO here at Langley, and people came from all over NATO to come here, and I was a big part of that. So those are the kind of experiences I had, from the very mundane to the very exciting to segregated or whatever you want to call it, to integrated, etc. So it was just marvelous. Okay.
How important is the history for people like yourself to be told to the young people for the future?
Well, very, very, very. I'll say that 3 times. Very, very, very. Now, the question is, how do you tell that? And will the young people listen to it and get off their telephones? Okay, now here's what I mean. For instance, you asked me about Catherine and Mary and Dorothy Vaughan, Eunice Smith, etc. When I got to NASA, we started in '62, we started building on ACD, Analytics and Computation Division. And we had a room about as big as this room with computers all around the walls like this and one set down the middle, all right? You had, and it was the big tape reels going, and all kinds of lights blinking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these were huge cabinets. And then you had cold water running under the floor all around the room in order to cool the cabinets down. Because if you didn't, they would just burn up. All right? Now, you got right here in this cell phone right here, I have 20 times the memory, the technical capability as that whole room full of computers. But if I only use this to get on and talk to my friends about junk, how much am I going to learn? Because again, I'll go back to the other question. If you're not talking to people who have more than you have mentally, et cetera, and all you're doing is talking trash on a telephone, you're misusing technology. We had to pay millions of dollars to build that one room at NASA in the Analysis and Computation Division, and I got it for $150 on my cell phone. And we misuse that. So children, young people aren't listening to what we had to go through. And you have to stand on somebody's shoulder. You cannot do this by yourself. I don't care whether you're white, black, blue, green, red, or anything else. You cannot do this by yourself. You have to stand on the shoulders of other people who've gone before you. We call them pioneers. I'm glad to have been one of the pioneers that some people can stand on my shoulders. So the importance of getting the message across to younger people is very, very, very important. But you have to tell it in a way that the young people will listen to what you're saying and not go, oh, he's just an old guy talking about, he's an old Uncle Tom anyway, okay, blah, blah, blah. The whole 9 yards, you see. So that's what's important about getting that across to the younger people. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it did.
Okay, good.
What would you say to a young person who wanted to follow in your footsteps and work at NASA?
You gotta work, all right? You gotta stick with it. You gotta not let anything get in your way. You got to set the goals all right? And you have to do what it takes to achieve them. It's not easy, all right? So if it's not easy, that means you have to have some, what we used to call stick-to-itiveness to get the job done. You got to spend, I mean, there were nights I didn't get any sleep because I had homework to do. When you're taking 20 and a half credits in engineering school, there are nights you're not going to sleep, okay? So you got to do all kinds of homework, all kinds of different things, and then hopefully just get up in the morning and go back to classes the next day. So if you don't have the drive to do it, you're not going to succeed. You have to have the drive, you have to stick to it, and you have to set the goal for yourself, and you achieve the goal, okay? That's what you have to do.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, my pleasure. My
It was
pleasure.
really interesting to
Okay.
hear about your experience.
Hope I helped somebody, all right? That's what it's all about. We want to help other people, or there's an old song that says, I hope if I can help somebody, all right, then my job is done or my life has been complete. Okay? Thank you very much for listening.
You're welcome.
Hopefully this was good for you, okay? Or y'all, or anybody that wants to see it. All right, but don't let this get in your way, folks.
All right, so this has been The Focus Show. I'm Ali Alexander. This is Samuel Scott Sr.
My pleasure.
Make sure you have a nice day. Bye.
Okay.
We have completed one. We are going to
That
put
it?
it in our
The weight loss if need to be.
But really throughout the rehearsals, you get a closer look